In the cold autumn morning of October 1871, amidst the smoldering ash of a city that had supposedly burned to the ground, a low-ranking municipal surveyor named Thomas Vance stepped into a crater on the south side of Chicago. The official reports were already being drafted before the smoke had even cleared from the sky. The narrative was clean, simple, and remarkably convenient. A wooden barn, a turned lantern, and a dry wind had reduced miles of sprawling urban landscape to desolate fields of charcoal. That was the story told to the newspapers, printed in history books, and repeated to every generation that followed. But as Vance pushed his iron measuring rod through 6 feet of scorched debris, expecting to strike soft prairie dirt, he heard a dense metallic ring. He scraped away the black silt, expecting to find the melted remains of a stove or an iron radiator. Instead, he uncovered a massive archway of carved red granite extending deep into the dark earth below street level. It was not a cellar. Cellars in that district were built of cheap pine timber and shallow fieldstone, raised barely 3 feet into the mud. This structure was made of dressed stone blocks weighing several tons each, fitted together with micro-thin joints that showed no signs of mortar. More unsettling than the craftsmanship was the state of the stone itself. The granite was not scorched from above, it was vitrified. The surface had been exposed to temperatures so extreme that the hard stone had melted like candle wax and re-solidified into a smooth, dark glass. Yet the wooden debris resting directly on top of it was merely charred on its outer crust. The fire above had burned at ordinary temperatures for a timber blaze, nowhere near the 3,000 degrees required to melt granite. The official report declared that everything above ground was destroyed by fire, forcing the city to level the land and build anew. But beneath the boots of the cleanup crews, an entirely different reality lay buried. Vance peered down into the narrow gap where the soil had caved in beside the arch. He lowered a lantern on a hemp rope, watching the pale circle of light descend 10, 20, 30 feet into a vast subterranean chamber. He saw rows of arched windows, stone pillars, and paved walkways running beneath the modern city streets, structures that, according to every official map, land grant, and historical record, had never existed. When Vance submitted his hand-drawn field notes and subterranean measurements to the city commissioner the following week, the documents were confiscated without discussion. He was reassigned to a remote rural survey district 300 miles away, and his original notebook vanished from the municipal archive. What happened in Chicago was not an isolated tragedy, nor was it a simple accident of urban growth. It was the opening movement of a systematic erasure stroke that swept across North America and Europe throughout the 19th century. Every major fire of that era followed the exact same suspicious script: catastrophic surface destruction, immediate martial law, the rapid dumping of millions of tons of landfill over lower building levels, and the swift construction of a new surface level directly on top of an older, grander world. They told us the fire destroyed everything above ground. They never explained why they had to bury what was underneath.
The official documentation surrounding the great urban fires of the 19th century reads like a carefully rehearsed script designed to prevent uncomfortable questions. Consider the official report commissioned by the City Council in the aftermath of the disaster. The document runs nearly 200 pages, detailing the loss of property, the movement of the wind, and the heroic efforts of the volunteer fire departments. Yet when structural engineers examine the forensic details buried within those same pages, the narrative begins to fracture under its own weight. According to the official timeline, the fire raged across the district for 27 hours, consuming thousands of structures made predominantly of timber, tar paper, and brick. But a timber fire, even one driven by high winds, operates under strict thermodynamic limits. It reaches temperatures between 800 and 1100 degrees Celsius. It can char wood, crumble weak brick, and warp soft metals like lead or copper. It cannot melt massive granite foundations, nor can it fuse silica-rich soil into subterranean glass panels. Yet tucked away in the appendix of the municipal damage assessment, buried under lists of destroyed dry goods and hardware stock, is a short entry written by an independent masonry inspector named Arthur Pendleton. Pendleton noted that while the wood frame upper stories of the commercial buildings had indeed burned away to ash, the lower foundation walls, extending 2 to 3 stories beneath the established street line, exhibited structural damage that defied physics. He wrote that the subterranean limestone blocks had experienced deep thermal fracturing from the inside out, as though subjected to an intense, focused energy source operating within the sealed lower levels rather than radiating down from the blaze above. Pendleton's observations were immediately suppressed. His detailed diagrams showing windows, doors, and decorative masonry located 20 feet beneath the sidewalk level were omitted from the final published volume provided to the public. To understand why these records were hidden, one must examine how these cities were allegedly constructed in the first place. The accepted history claims that pioneer populations, equipped with little more than hand tools, horse-drawn carts, and basic steam engines, arrived in virgin wilderness and within 2 or 3 decades erected massive stone metropolises featuring imperial architecture, vaulted underground tunnels, and subterranean street grids. We are asked to believe that raw frontier settlements built elaborate multi-story subterranean arcades made of imported granite simply to store grain or coal, only to completely forget their existence a generation later. When the fires occurred, they provided the perfect legal and physical cover. By declaring an entire district a total loss, municipal authorities established broad powers of eminent domain. They sealed off multi-block perimeters under military guard, prohibited property owners from excavating their own lots, and deployed heavy equipment to level the remaining walls. Millions of tons of debris were not cleared away. Instead, they were dumped into the lower levels of the existing structures, effectively burying the ground floors and turning them into foundations for the next era of construction. When citizens returned to rebuild, they were instructed to build their new entrances at the new street level, 1 or 2 stories higher than before. The original ground floors, with their arched doorways, elegant brickwork, and deep windows, were left in total darkness beneath the pavement, converted by decree into dark basements that history simply forgot to mention.
As independent investigators dig beneath the surface narrative, the evidence of an intentionally buried past begins to multiply across hundreds of municipal archives. The pattern is not limited to a single city or a single country. It appears with haunting consistency throughout the late 19th century. In city after city, from the Pacific coast to the industrial heartlands of Europe, the official records tell the same story of tragic fires followed by massive street-raising projects. They claimed these raising projects were executed for drainage, sanitation, or flood control, but a closer examination of survival photographs from the era reveals a completely different physical reality. In photographs taken immediately after the fires, before the clearing crews finished their work, one can clearly see fully formed brick and stone facades extending deep into the earth. Archways that are now called sewer mains feature decorative keystone carvings and plaster finishes designed for human habitation, not water drainage. Street-level windows in 19th-century buildings were routinely built half buried in the soil, forcing workers to dig small stone wells around them just to let in a sliver of sunlight. Ask yourself why any architect building in a newly established town with endless cheap land would design a grand stone building with its lowest windows 3 feet underground. The answer is obvious. The street level was not where it was supposed to be. The street level was raised after the building was already standing. Consider the testimony of James Callahan, a master bricklayer who worked on the reconstruction efforts following a major municipal blaze in 1889. Callahan kept a private journal that survived in the possession of his great-granddaughter until it was analyzed in 2018. In an entry dated July 14, 1889, Callahan recorded his frustration with the official engineering plans handed down by the city surveyor. He wrote, "We were ordered to build the new brick retaining wall directly over the old archways on 3rd Street. I told the foreman that the lower arches were solid stone, stronger than anything we were mixing, and that they ran continuously under the middle of the road for at least 2 blocks. He told me to keep my mouth shut and fill them with crushed rubble. We dumped 60 loads of gravel down into those rooms before the superintendent was satisfied. There were iron doors down there that led deeper, but they poured quick-setting cement over the frames before anyone could check where they went." Callahan's journal entries match the field reports of dozens of utility workers who, over the past century, have accidentally broken through basement walls during routine pipe installations. Time and again, plumbers and electricians report breaking through a standard concrete foundation only to find themselves standing in an abandoned 19th-century street, complete with stone sidewalks, iron lampposts, and brick storefronts extending out into the pitch-black void beneath modern asphalt. In almost every recorded instance, when these subterranean discoveries are reported to local university history departments or municipal preservation boards, the response is swift and uniform. The site is declared structurally unsafe, heavy equipment is dispatched within 24 hours, and the opening is filled with liquid concrete under the supervision of state officials. No archaeological surveys are permitted, no photographs are released to the press. The public is told that the subterranean void was merely an abandoned coal vault or a forgotten storage cellar, and the mystery is quietly reburied beneath another layer of cement.
When you step back from individual cities and examine the global timeline of the mid to late 19th century, the sheer scale of this phenomenon becomes overwhelming. Between the years 1850 and 1910, dozens of major cities across the world suffered near-identical catastrophic fire events. From San Francisco to Seattle, from Toronto to London, from Moscow to Sydney, great urban centers were systematically gutted by fire, cleared under emergency powers, and rapidly remapped. It is statistically impossible for so many massive stone and masonry metropolises, built in completely different climates and managed by different governments, to suffer identical total destruction events within the same tight 6-decade window. What we are observing is not a series of random accidents, but a coordinated global reset of the urban landscape. The fires served a dual purpose. First, they destroyed the physical evidence of an advanced, highly sophisticated global civilization that existed prior to our recorded history, a civilization that possessed superior architectural capabilities, advanced energy systems, and a deep understanding of resonance and stoneworking. Second, the fires created a clean slate that allowed institutional authorities to rewrite the historical record from scratch. Think about the timeline we have been taught to accept without question. We are told that in the early 1800s, pioneer settlers moved into undeveloped regions with ox-drawn wagons. Yet by the 1870s, those same regions were somehow filled with hundreds of immense, identical buildings featuring magnificent domes, massive colonnades, intricate stone carvings, and underground transport systems. Where were the quarries that produced these millions of tons of high-grade granite and marble? Where were the specialized factories that fabricated the miles of ornamental cast iron? Where were the massive roads and rail networks required to transport these materials across undeveloped wilderness? They did not exist. The official history asks us to believe in a magical golden age of construction where horse and buggy societies built world-class stone cathedrals and grand civic centers in a matter of months, only for those same societies to immediately lose the ability or desire to build anything comparable ever again.
The truth is far simpler and far more disturbing. The 19th-century settlers did not build these magnificent cities, they inherited them. They moved into the surviving structures of an older world, repurposed them for their own crude uses, and when necessary, used controlled fires and demolition projects to destroy the parts of the architecture they could not explain, control, or maintain. The institutional suppression of this reality was absolute. Maps produced before the fire events were quietly recalled and destroyed. Photographic archives were curated to ensure that only images showing wooden huts and dusty roads were preserved, while early daguerreotypes showing grand stone ruins surrounded by desolate mud were locked away in restricted university vaults. Whenever an independent researcher attempts to piece together these missing records, they encounter a wall of institutional silence, missing ledger pages, and sudden archival fires that conveniently destroy the exact birth certificates, construction logs, and land titles needed to prove the theory.
The true implications of this buried history extend far beyond mere architecture and municipal corruption. If the great fires of the 19th century were used to conceal a pre-existing subterranean urban infrastructure, then everything we have been taught about our origins, our technological development, and our place in time is a carefully constructed fiction. The structures buried beneath our modern streets were not designed merely to be lived in. They were functional components of an integrated global energy and information network. The massive granite foundations, the deep vaulted chambers, and the precise subterranean alignment of these buildings suggest a mastery of physics and engineering that far exceeds our current understanding. Many of these buried lower levels feature complex networks of copper-lined channels, quartz-infused stone blocks, and subterranean water conduits that hint at wireless energy distribution or atmospheric power harvesting. When the stewards of the current paradigm took control, they realized that if humanity understood the true nature of the buildings they inhabited, they would realize that advanced energy and architectural self-sufficiency were once free and accessible to all. The narrative of scarcity, of slow technological progress, and of perpetual human struggle depended entirely on erasing the memory of what came before. The fires were the weapon chosen to break that generational continuity. By burning the surface structures, killing or displacing the original populations, and filling the lower levels with debris, the architects of this cover-up created a blank psychological slate. Within 2 generations, the survivors and their children had no memory of the world that existed before the smoke. They accepted the new surface streets as the only streets that had ever existed. They accepted the false history written for them in brand new textbooks. They looked at the massive stone archways poking out of the mud and believed the official explanation that they were merely decorative basements built by eccentric 19th-century masons. The sheer psychological brilliance of this strategy lies in its invisibility. You can walk down the main street of almost any old city today, look down at the sidewalk vault lights, those small glass prisms set into the pavement, and never realize that you are walking directly over the forgotten roof of an ancient street. You can look at the ground floor of a historic building, notice that the decorative entrance is now located on the 2nd story, while the original grand arches are buried beneath 6 feet of concrete, and your mind will naturally rationalize it, because that is what you were taught to see. But once you know what to look for, the illusion collapses forever. The buried windows, the vitrified foundation stones, the missing construction records, and the absurd official timelines all point to a single inescapable conclusion. We are living on the top layer of a stolen world, walking on the roofs of buildings constructed by a civilization that was systematically erased from the human memory.
The truth about our past is not buried under thousands of miles of distant jungle or hidden at the bottom of the ocean. It is lying directly beneath your feet, separated from you by a few thin inches of modern asphalt and a wall of carefully cultivated silence. Every time a modern construction crew digs a trench for a new high-rise, every time a water main bursts beneath an old downtown district, the buried world briefly flashes back into the light. The official fire reports blamed the damage on the surface, urging us to look up at the burning timber and mourn what was lost above ground. They wanted us to keep our eyes focused on the smoke so we would never think to look down at the stone. But stone does not lie. It retains the thermal signatures of energies it was never supposed to encounter. It preserves the archways, the windows, and the doors of an era that official history insists never occurred. The people who ordered those lower levels filled with cement believed that 60 feet of crushed brick and liquid concrete would be enough to keep the past quiet forever. They believed that as long as they controlled the textbooks, the newspapers, and the municipal archives, no one would ever assemble the pieces of the puzzle. They were wrong. The physical evidence is too vast, the patterns are too consistent, and the subterranean architecture is too enduring to remain hidden in the dark. The forgotten foundations are beginning to speak through the cracks in the pavement, through the private journals of long-dead workmen, and through the persistent curiosity of those who refuse to accept the official story. You now hold a piece of knowledge that most people will spend their entire lives walking right over without ever noticing. The next time you walk through the historic district of your city, look at the base of the oldest stone buildings. Look at the buried windows peeking out from beneath the dirt. Look at the subterranean vault lights glowing faintly underfoot. You are not looking at ordinary basements or routine architectural quirks. You are looking at the sealed chambers of an erased timeline, the undeniable proof that the history we were handed is a cover story written over the ashes of a buried world. The question is no longer whether our past was hidden from us. The question is how long we will allow them to keep it buried. If you are ready to see through the official narratives and uncover the truth that lies beneath the surface, stand with us. Subscribe, share this investigation, and join the growing network of minds dedicated to excavating the erased history of our world before the final records are lost forever.